Hey, it's Brett. This screencast is about RSpec test doubles, which is a really nice feature of RSpec to let you create fake objects that have stubbed out method returns to make your tests less dependent on other data setup and the implementation of those methods, and instead you can have these isolated unit tests that run fast. Now, a brief word before I get into it, which is these unit tests are nice in isolation, but it's important that you have an integration test or like a full stack acceptance test that verifies that this works. And you want to generally follow the testing pyramid of having the fewest integration or let's say end-to-end tests, and then a little more integration tests, and then the most unit tests, because the unit tests are the fastest, the end-to-end tests are the slowest because they're exercising the full stack of your system. The unit tests are fast and generally run in isolation without one another. So in this episode, I'm not going to cover end-to-end testing or integration testing, but maybe that could be an episode in the future, but I just want to focus on test doubles and unit testing with them. So in this code base, I have a Ruby class called post, and I have a Ruby class called blog. Blog has many posts, but this isn't Rails, but I'll probably use some Rails speak, and has an array of posts, let's say. And you can add a post to a blog, and that is great. It does the trick. This is kind of a little bit manufactured, but I'm just imagining there's a blogging platform called Blogo. You can create a blog, and then you can add posts to your blog. And what I want to build is a class called router that allows you to get the URL for a post and a blog and any object that you pass into it. So let's go ahead and we'll start by creating our spec. And the tests are using RSpec, of course. So let's do spec, and we'll make it routerspec.rb. We'll require our spec helper. We'll RSpec describe router. We'll do subject, and we'll just do describe class.new. Because that's what we've got. This happens automatically, so you could just call subject, but I'm just writing it out for being explicit. And let's go and run that test. Okay, uninitialized constant router. So if we go ahead and we'll create the router class. And this would be driven out by the app by your first failing end-to-end test or by refactoring. So we'll just assume that's what's driving this out. I'm using tmux with Vim, and I'm pressing \T, and that's running the tests in this pane too, just so you know what's happening over there. But run the tests however you would, uninitialized constant router. So we need to require router. And now it's green. We have no examples though. So let's go ahead and write our first example, first failing example. I want to call the method on the router instance URL for. And we'll say it returns the full URL with blog subdomain and router. With blog subdomain, protocol, and path. Returns the full URL with protocol, subdomain, and path. Okay. And what we'll do is we'll start by passing in a blog, or we'll start by passing in a post, and then we'll pass in the blog. And we want to make this method work for both of those types that are passed in. So we would say, let's say we have a post, and it's post.new. And we'll start by not using test doubles, and then we'll refactor to use test doubles, and that will show why it's nice. And then we'll say post.new title is using RSpec test doubles. It has a content, which is some stuff that's not important. It has a blog, so we'll pass the blog in. These are all required to have a post, right? And maybe you have factory bot or fabrication to set up this data, but for us, we're in plain Ruby, we don't have that. So we have our post, and then we're going to expect subject.url for post to equal https://. We don't have our blog, so we'll do blog.new, and that has a title, which is, what else does a blog have? And it has a subdomain, so we'll call it Brett Codes, just for the sake of it, and then for the subdomain, we'll call it Brett Codes. So the expectation, I ran that too soon, but the expectation is that it'll be something like brettcodes.blogo.com/ using RSpec test doubles. Let me move this down here so it's wider. Now if we run that, we have uninitialized constant blog because we have to require these constants. I don't have auto constant requiring set up yet for these unit tests, so we just require those quick, that's fine. We're going to refactor this out so that that's not needed. And now we're getting the failure we want, which is URL4 is not a method. So then we describe URL4, wrong number of arguments. We'll just call it object. And now it's returning nil instead of what we want, which is also what's expected. And now we can go and we'll just code for the blog post in particular. So what we'll do is we'll say a couple of these things, like maybe we pass in the domain and we'll just assume it's HTTPS, or maybe we'll say protocol and we'll default it to HTTPS. Just to keep it simple. And up here in our describe class.new, call it blogo.com. We'll make these private because we don't necessarily need them yet. Outside of this class. So then we instantiate the string, we interpolate the protocol, we interpolate the, since the post, we'll do object.blog.subdomain. And this is going to be bad code, but then we're going to refactor it and make it better. .domain, forgot the @ here, so we've got domain, and then we'll do /, then we'll do object.permalink, or it's slug actually. So we'll call it slug. So there we go. Now what's going on? Oh, I forgot up here to pass in the domain. We run it, it passes, that's great. But see this test setup? It's pretty, not too bad, but because this is like a simple example, but we have to require blog, we have to require post. It's not isolated, right? It's this code here, object.blog.subdomain, that's reaching out to the object's blog and then to the blog's subdomain, which is reaching really far and relies upon that implementation. So instead, what I'd like to do is use instance doubles. And that way we don't have to instantiate these classes. We're not relying upon the implementation of blog and subdomain or the implementation of slug. So then what we would do here, and we'll start with blog, is we'll do double, call it blog, and we'll just delete this and let's run our test. So this creates a fake object that just exists in our tests, but you can pass it into methods and use it just as you would. So you'll see here, double blog received unexpected message subdomain. And you'll start seeing whatever it gets called out to, like if it calls subdomain, and then we didn't implement it, it will fail the test. So then all we do is you pass it subdomain, like a hash with a key, and we'll pass the subdomain. So now it's not actually reaching out to the blog class. We actually don't need the blog class required now. We run it, it still passes, so that's nice. So blog is a little simpler. And then we have post, which the router doesn't really care about the post. The router cares about just the object and then reacting to the messages that it calls to build the URL. So let's actually create a double called post. And we can leave title here, which is actually kind of nice. We can leave content. We actually don't need either of those for this test, so that simplifies the setup. And then we'll see the failure is for slug is called, or it fails because we don't have a slug. So all we have to do is mock what that would do. So using RSpec test doubles, fails because I missed my S in doubles. So now it passes. So now we're green, which is nice. And so this test just simplified itself in that we no longer require the blog or the post class. It's a little more generic, and it is more isolated. Also, imagine if those blogs and post records were like in Rails and you're loading it from the database. Creating these fake classes is much faster than creating data in the database. And all that router cares about is that object implements blog, and which then implements subdomain, and then object implements slug. So then what we'll do is talk about verifying doubles. So let's drive that out by, I don't like how it's objects.blog.subdomain. I think that's kind of annoying because let's say, well, let's start by going out from this angle. Let's say context with a post. And then let's say the same thing, but we'll say with a blog. Because let's say you want to get like the URL for your blog. Maybe it's in the admin interface of this Blogo platform. Maybe it's you want to link to it somewhere, whatever it is. We'll just say it returns the full URL with protocol and subdomain with no path, because it's just like the root of it. So we have our blog, has its subdomain. Now let's pass in subject for URL, and we'll expect it to just be brettcodes.com, brettcodes.blogo.com, and we'll run it. And then we'll start to see some of the brittleness in our implementation for URL 4, where double blog received unexpected message blog. Okay. Well, we could implement blog and have a double that's a blog. And let's see what happens there. And this is going to show the brittleness of blogs, or the brittleness of test doubles. Because this double is just, like we're manufacturing in our tests. It's like totally fake, you know what I mean? So we'll add a slug to the blog, even though blog doesn't implement slug. And we got a URL out, but it's something else.blogo.com/fake instead of brettcodes.blogo.com, which is not what we want, right? And this isn't even the reality of what blog implements. It's like a new fake blog. And that is where you can get into trouble with blog, because as title and subdomain and post, but it doesn't have slug and it doesn't have blog as a method. But you could still stub it out and fake it. And that's like a really dangerous aspect of doubles. So you have to be careful with them. There's a way to get the benefits of a double, a test double where you can mock out these methods really quick, or step out the methods quickly and not have reliance upon these different class types. And that is by using what in RSpec is called an instance double, which is a verified double, where RSpec goes and checks and makes sure that whatever you pass in as the first argument, which should be a class or a constant that exists, implements that method. And in your spec helper, you'll see verify partial doubles as a config for the option. So this prevents you from mocking or stubbing a method that does not exist on a real object. And defaults to true, so that's nice. Or it will default to true in RSpec 4, and then the RSpec 3.10 config I have here enables it by default. So all you have to do then is do instance double, and now if we run this again, I think in Rails this would automatically work, but in here we have to require our blog. We have to require a post. And I think we have to require a router because it needs the classes to exist before, like RSpec has to load these up to check that they have the methods before it can verify them. And I think in Rails that'll automatically happen, but for here we'll just require them. And that's actually nice in that it adds some loading to our spec helper so it's slower, but then we don't have to require a router here. And that becomes a little bit just easier to manage. But now we'll start to see the error we want. So here you see failure error blog. The blog class does not implement the method slug. So now it's starting to verify that our blog class is actually a little bit more like our blog class that we expect. So let's get rid of the blog slug, and then we'll get rid of the blog, right? Blog class does not implement the instance method blog. Great. That is accurate. And we don't want that. So now let's go ahead and run this test again and it fails. It says that our instance double blog received unexpected message blog. And we want to recode this to instead, let's just call out to subdomain and slug, and we'll run it. Now our instance double blog received the unexpected message slug because it doesn't implement it. So let's just fake it. Blog does not implement method slug, and this can actually help us drive out what blog is like. And in our blog, let's go ahead and we'll add slug. And we'll just add a quick unit test for it too that just says like describe. We're in blogspec.rb. Slug, it returns an empty string. We'll run that, it doesn't exist. Run it again. Oops, we ran the wrong test. All right, run that, we got nil. Run it again, it passes, run the whole thing, it passes. Now if we go back here and run it again, our test actually passes, which is nice because slug now exists on blog RB, so this instance double is legit. We have our subdomain, our slug, it's empty, we get our URL, we're great, right? That feels like an improvement, but let's run all of our tests because we made a change to URL 4. And post received unexpected message subdomain, but it didn't implement it. So let's go and we'll implement it. We'll delete the post, run our tests again. I'm going to delete the blog because URL4 no longer calls out to that call chain. So we save it, we run it, all our tests are passing, so that's good. But this post here is a fake double, or it's a double that's not verified. So let's make it an instance double, we'll verify it. Now we get the failure we want, which is the post class does not implement the instance method subdomain. And this is nice, right? We're getting more than we would with a double. You could go, with doubles, you could go really far and manufacture this really complex inaccurate modeling of your data, which I think is pretty risky and not what you want to be doing. Of course, if you have your end-to-end tests and your integration tests, it'll exercise these code paths fully from top to bottom to make sure it works. So you can cover yourself that way, but the power of these unit tests is that we're like manufacturing a very small slice of the code and then testing it and handling all the different scenarios, which we'll get to in a second, which is the third context. But for now, let's get this passing. So this failure to me says the post class does not implement the method subdomain. So let's go ahead and do it. And it returns the blog subdomain. We'll say expect, and also you can see up here I have an instance double of the blog, which is nice. So I already started using that so that we were ready here. And we'll just call it breadcodes. So I'm not feeling funny or original. And then all we do is we just say expect subject dot subdomain to equal breadcodes. Run that test. It fails because we don't have the method subdomain. Add that, run it, we get nil. Then we call blog.subdomain. And now all of those pass. Whoops. Run all those tests, they pass. We have subdomain, go back to router RB. Run this, it passes. Run it all, they all pass, so we're good. And now this URL for handles objects that are generic, and they just have to implement subdomain and slug to be considered like routable, right? And this is nice because it's not hard to imagine adding other resources. Like maybe we have a page, and the page has content and all this stuff, but a page has a slug and it's associated with a blog. So we would just call out to the subdomain of the page. We're no longer violating the law of Demeter, which, I don't know, try to abide by it, which says you don't want to have a method calling a method, you don't want to have an object call a method that then calls another method on the returned object. You generally want to just do call one method and then have it implement it. So that's nice, and that we're no longer violating that really. And that's nice, but I think this code is just more resilient and better. But let's write a context for with a non-routable object. And here's a case where we can actually pass in a double, in a case for using a non-verified double where it's just some object that just doesn't implement them. Or we'll just say with an object that does not implement subdomain and slug, it returns a not routable error. And we'll add that error. It'll just be some just generic Ruby error. So then what we'll say is we'll just call it object, and we'll call it a double. And let's call this a, this is funny because I'm trying to think of something that you wouldn't want a URL for. But generally on the web, you want things to, we'll just say, not routable. You can just pass a string in that just identifies it. And since it doesn't implement subdomain or slug, we're going to see what happens. But what I want to say is expect do, and we'll say this, expect that subject.url for, pass in our object. Let's call it non-routable. Let's actually call it unroutable. Sorry that I keep going back and forth. To raise error. We'll just say that. We'll start with to raise error and then we'll make it more specific. Run that. returns a not routable error, or it doesn't actually. It's going to return an error, but not the one we want it to. So that's why you have to specify what you want. So we'll say not routable error. Also, RSpec does not like this because to raise error swallows the error and isn't specific enough. So if we type in not routable error, we'll actually get a problem without having the not routable error. So we'll call it not routable error. It'll inherit from standard error. And we've got that. I think we need describe class. Cool. So now we run that test, and we have expected router, not routable error, got RSpec, mock expectation, mock expectation error, double unroutable, receive message subdomain with no args. The error we're getting is it's calling out the subdomain, which doesn't exist on the double, but the error we want is not routable error. So what we want to do here is in URL 4 is we'll say raise not routable error dot new unless object dot is it responds to? Can't remember. I think that's it. Let's Google. Method defined. All right. So that should do the trick. That doesn't work. Oh yeah, respond to. What did I do wrong? Oh, the S in response. Jeez Louise. There we go. I think that's what we want now. Hey, there we go. So the reason why that method, what was it? Method, let's check. Method defined. I don't think that works because we're in test double land. So, but I have a typo in respond to, where that goes and sees if the object can, if this method can be called subdomain and slug. And if it can't, then we raise our error. Otherwise, we build our URL because we have confidence that we can do that, which is nice. I think that just about does it. Let's run all of the RSpec tests in the whole codebase, and they all pass. So that's nice. And we've got this router class, which you could then call router.new. Maybe you have a router already in your codebase or whatever your class is that you need. But yeah, here's an example where you've got instance doubles. We use them to actually drive out and refactor some of the existing code. Even though it's a manufactured example, it's still pretty close to what it's like in practice. We've got a method that takes a duck-typed object that just needs to implement these two methods for it to work. And then we've got a double that is just a generic object that doesn't implement what we need it to, therefore it raises the error that we expect it to. I hope that helps you see a little better understand doubles in RSpec and instance doubles and the importance of verifying them. From here, I'd like to share more and create more episodes about stubbing and mocking in more complex ways where maybe we don't have full control over what's being passed into methods, or maybe we're working with Rails and there are classes and constants that call methods that, yeah, we're not passing in, or there's no dependency injection. So, but that'll be in the future. For now, hope this helped. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you take care. All right, bye.